Today, we're going to dive into talking about that transitional piece, that piece where you know there are some things that you want, unable to figure out how to move yourself forward, why you may feel stuck, what we can do to help you get to those ultimate goals. I have a special guest with me today, Gayle. She's going to share some amazing insight that can help you be able to transition to that true space of feeling fulfilled, complete, whole in your life.
Thank you, Brian. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So let me ask this question. Obviously, in our world today, we have multiple things going on, lots of different directions. It's sometimes even hard to tell truth from false information because there's so much of it out there, whether it's social media or wherever it comes from. And sometimes it leaves us feeling disconnected, unsure. Our confidence can be rocked by these different things because we really don't know what to trust, who to trust, etc. And when we're in that fragile mindset, it becomes a challenge to stay focused and to move ourselves forward. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So, how about you share a little bit about the benefit of what we want to get into today, what your experiences have been, and why we feel it's relevant to talk about these things?
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for framing that up, and just to give your audience some context of where I'm coming from. The work that I do for myself and for my clients really comes from a place of wanting to speak what's true, wanting to. I work with business owners, I work with coaches and conscious leaders who want to market themselves authentically and who want to create healthy business relationships, but really healthy relationships across the board. And I like to blend sort of the sublime with the practical, so that we can really co-create a pathway to your authentic voice. And for me, it really comes down to being able to communicate clearly, boldly, lead lovingly. And I think, that's a very important point in the world that we live in today. And all of it is about making the world a better place without hiding or silencing yourself or others. And so it's interesting to me, the timing of our conversation today. It feels a little tender, and also really poignant to be talking about how do you move from that space of recognizing what's true for you and speaking to that and doing that in a way that honors you as well as honors people who you may be wanting to connect with,
Mhm.
and in a way that maybe also honors people who don't agree with you, right?
And that's a challenge that we face today is and I always use the term silos. We get so siloed into what our perspectives, beliefs, etc. are. And then when we start talking about listening, which is one thing I know we're going to get into today, talking about how we can be better listeners and be more open and receptive to different perspectives and different ideas, different concepts. But yeah, we get into these silos, and it's like anybody who's not a bunker buddy with me in this silo is quote unquote the enemy, and that's
Yeah.
very unfortunate that we seem to dig ourselves into these places because it's actually those differences that give us strength. But when we don't lean into it properly, then we start to have the challenges that we're seeing today.
Yes, yes, I agree, and I think a lot of that, just in what I've noticed in my own experience, I think the truth is that we as humans are caring, we are loving, we have compassion, we have empathy. We might not necessarily have the skills or the language um, to express these things, and there's a whole host of reasons why that might be. And we'll probably get into that a little bit. And I think a big piece of this is really being more connected in our heart space, right? And understanding that when we're struggling to listen or to be with somebody else's perspective that doesn't match up with our own, and we're starting to feel that in our body, and maybe, maybe we're getting tense or constricted or hot, you're feeling that flush of anger. It's it's an important thing to notice, right? It's a signal that there's something about it that doesn't feel maybe safe for us, and it's important to listen to that instead of to just simply lash out, for
Mm,
example, right?
mm.
Or shut down, right? It's totally acceptable to sort of just notice what's happening and recognize, ooh, I'm having a I'm feeling activated here. I'm having a sensation or an emotion coming up, and I'm just noticing that. And to just step out and give yourself some space to really check in with yourself about, okay, what am I noticing? What am I feeling? And what do I need right now? Right?
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to just kind of go into projecting onto somebody else or lashing out on somebody else or, making the other person wrong when in fact your body is signaling to you, I need something.
Very true. And identifying those triggers for yourself is a key component. That awareness piece, which is something I know we talk a lot about, um, can really be a huge benefit to you when you can identify what the trigger is, so that when you sense that, you do essentially take that step back where you go, okay, let me, as I say, breathe, and kind of reset yourself because you have identified that that trigger has essentially been set off or pushed. Um, Obviously, I think you mentioned in your introduction that you do not only individual coaching, but you end up coaching with businesses, right?
Yes.
And my question there goes to culture, because I think culture is a word that gets misused or misunderstood sometimes, because especially within businesses, culture is an important piece of it. But then outside of the business, the culture that we create when we are dealing with social media or social groups or social cliques and different things also matters. What are your perspectives or thoughts, and what have you experienced when you are guiding your businesses, when you're talking about the importance of culture and how they go about establishing that?
Yeah, it's an interesting word, isn't it? Um, for me, it always comes back to authentic connection and truth. And when, it's one thing to, I work a lot with the individual leaders in business, and we have to start with the self. This is what I've noticed. It's important to create that connection across, our families, our communities, our teams, um, and we have to start with ourselves. And for those leaders who are conscious, they're self-aware, they care about creating authentic connection, they're going to create an environment, a culture, if you want to call it that, where people are going to feel safe and ideally heard and seen
Mhm.
in that environment, right? And so that might look very different than, for example, a toxic workplace where there's backstabbing or there's gossiping or, there's uh, a real unhealthy kind of a competitiveness. And sometimes it's the leaders can model a different way, right? And so we often think we got to start at the top, and sometimes it doesn't have to start there, right? We can start with employees and helping employees to get in touch with what they need, what's true for them. Um, and sometimes that looks like making decisions that actually will shift the hearts and minds of leadership too. So it kind of depends on the angle that we're coming in from, but it's not necessarily about, I think sometimes people think of culture as like a homogenous thing, right? And sort of getting people in line or getting people to subscribe to the same philosophy. And I think that there's an importance to being aligned in your values, right? Um, but at the same time, it's also about, like you said, that active listening, that being open, being vulnerable in an appropriate way, being in flow, and also being willing to take some risks, because change often doesn't necessarily come from, hey, we're all in agreement. Change often comes from, actually, we're not in agreement,
Hmm.
but let's come together and build bridges to come into a place of solution around something that maybe we're not agreeing upon. And so conflict can actually be, I totally get it. I was very conflict avoidant in my younger years. And, you know, it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable for us, but sometimes it's a really healthy way to come up with new possibilities and new solutions when you have the skills and the leadership, um, to be able to create a container where that's not only allowed and accepted, but is fostered and modeled.
Yes, yes, very true. Conflict is something, as you said, I was very much the same about being conflict avoidant and just not wanting to get into those situations where you're feeling combative and just the pressure and the angst that comes with all of that. But the thing, as you just said, though, most times there's greatness on the other side of that effort and that focus and that work, because
Right.
when we put multiple minds, multiple brains, different perspectives together, we can usually find a better solution when you just have that one dimension to it, which is an important thing. A question I do want to get back to, and you were talking about leadership within the business, and we're talking about culture and how that happens, and that, is it this homogenous thing, etc. When we look at the term accountability, which is another term that gets used a lot in
Mhm.
both in cultures of businesses, and individual scenarios, but within a business specifically, who's accountable? Where does the buck stop when we talk about developing a strong culture, whether it's based in true communication, respecting the individual perspectives that are there? Is that a leadership thing? Is it something that's modeled, or does it go deeper? Meaning, um, there needs to be documentation. Is it in the mission statement? Is it part of our values that we have as an organization? And then how we then go about communicating that to the masses.
Yeah, I think it can be all those things. And you know, my my initial thought that was bubbling up as you were speaking is that it's all of our responsibility. It's everyone's. You know, everyone has the responsibility to be accountable for what they say, for what they do. That doesn't always happen, right?
Yeah.
So these other pieces that you're bringing forward, you know, helps with the communication of the expectation and the alignment with that. You know, ensuring that yes, in fact, we are, you know, we are being actually accountable, you know, having it in writing, something that you can refer to when maybe people are not being accountable, right? And so there's lots of levels and layers to that. And I think at the heart of it, it really is, being very clear, I think, from the leadership perspective, that the leaders are going to model accountability and that there's an expectation there of their people also having accountability and being clear about what that looks like, what consequences there are. Um, you know, and if it's not for you and me, and maybe for some others, like that's a really, accountability is a really clear concept,
Mm.
but we all come into the work environment, we all come into the world and we have our own coping mechanisms, we have our own defenses, and we may not necessarily have a history with a good model of what accountability actually is. In fact, we might have a, a better model of what it's not. And so I think for leaders, understanding that, um, hey, you know, maybe your employees don't have a clear idea of what accountability actually is, and as the leader to model that, but to also support people in those skills, I think is really important.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. Another thing that comes into play in that same vein is expectations. What are the expectations, and how has that been communicated? And that plays into all of our relationships, I believe, from a
Yeah.
communication and setting the expectation standpoint. In your coaching and different things, what techniques or tools or frameworks have you used that you have found to be effective at helping people be able to really frame and communicate what their expectation is? Because when you don't have that clarity on that, that's where the disconnects start to happen. You start to see, well, why are we failing at this? As well, what I think and expect and what you think and expect and are delivering, we're not in alignment. So how are you dealing
Right.
with that?
Yeah, yeah, and clear is kind. Having clarity is a kindness.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a lot of different tools that I can use with clients and businesses on that. And I think that one of the important things is our self awareness. We have our brains are amazing things, and yet sometimes they get in the way, right? And we make assumptions, and so having an awareness of, I might be making an assumption here. I might be assuming that because it's clear to me, it's clear to this other person. My expectations are clear to them, right? So having awareness around assumption, or having awareness around, what, this is what I'm available for,
Mhm.
and this is what I'm not available for. So sometimes we have to have that clarity within ourselves
Mhm.
first, before we're even going out and communicating to others about what our expectations are, and doing that in a clear way. And I think that also, having, I don't know if this is the proper term, but I'm thinking of it as a feedback loop, right? Like being open to improvement. Well, I think this is clear, and maybe even checking in with the person that you're speaking with in the moment, or maybe having some sort of feedback loop built into your um, relationships with people.
Mhm.
What did you hear me say?
Mhm.
Simply asking the question, how did that land for you, right? And so checking in with people. And on the flip side, when it's not clear to the person who's receiving that message, they can check in too, or they can simply say, what, I'm not sure I get where you're going with this, or this is what I heard. Is that what you mean?
Very important piece of it is the feedback loop, and why we don't effectively use that more. I'm not sure. I is maybe it's, as you said, that assumption piece that, well, I understand it completely, so I would think they would understand it completely too, which is obviously not true, because we're bringing our own unique thoughts and perspectives and understandings to everything we do in life. So having that check in, I think, is a very important part of it. The last piece of that, when you talk about that, is understanding the why behind it altogether, right? What is the intent, which is another big word that comes into play when, it's definitely in the coaching that I do is, you're setting this goal, you want to achieve X, Y, or Z. What is the intent behind what's driving that from an intention standpoint, and really understanding the why? Is that discussions or conversations that you also get into?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, because that's where people connect with each other, right? um, yeah, I was working with a team that that is associated with higher education, college, and very clear on their mission, and the why behind it. And even when that team was going through some growing pains, and there were some assumptions going on, and there were some expectations that weren't being met, and some people were like, what's happening, they were getting a little nervous, from the leadership side and from the employee side. um, there were a lot of things that happened there. And I believe that that shared vision, that shared goal was an important piece for getting those parties back to the table, even if they felt a little bit of the sting of like, I don't like what's happening, because it's something greater than, our ego, right? So that why really can be a unifying factor.
Hmm. Hmm.
It can bring people back together when there's rupture or confusion.
Do you get into, when you talk about building these cultures, especially within organizations, the importance and relevance of things like mission statements and what are core values? Do you get into helping them sort those things out, or in most situations they figure that out for themselves already?
Yeah, I typically work with individuals and businesses that are already clear on that. I mean, there might be some refinement and clarity that comes from working with me. It's really, for me, it's more about going into how are we showing up right now? What's our alignment with what we say we're doing right now? And if there are gaps, what's the path to closing that gap?
Hmm. Hmm. Perfect. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's a key component, and it's interesting. I'm going through that right now with a team that I'm helping to guide, and there are two teams involved, and they are codependent on each other for very obvious reasons. And they are in that space of pointing the finger at the other
Mhm.
team.
Sure.
It's them, it's them. That's where the problem is, and they are missing that there is this gap that's there because they're not understanding how to communicate, how to make sure that what their perspective is on X matches the perspective of the team on the other side on X. So that I deliver this, and the other team goes, what's that? That's not what their expectation is. And that's not what they're expecting to see. So when we're talking about those types of communication frameworks and how we get there, that is part of, as you said, the showing up, what we think, feel in our minds, our perception, our perspective of it. But then how is that actually coming across? How is that showing up? Uh, when you're talking about those things, how do you get people to, I guess, step back? Because they usually get down in the weeds and they're not even able to see it. To get back, to step back and get far enough away so they can actually see the larger landscape and start to go, oh, now I get it.
Well, a lot of that is the story that they have about the situation, right, in their mind. And sometimes we need the space to verbalize it. And it's why what you do is so valuable, right? Is I imagine that part of your work is allowing them the space to tell the story, right? And not to, I don't mean to sound dismissive about that. That's not to say that there aren't legitimate things that are happening, but we're often up here, right?
Hmm.
And we're telling ourselves a certain narrative. And sometimes we need to vent. We just need to get it out, right? So that we can then come from a different energy, a different awareness, a different space, and doing that in a container with a guide, with a facilitator, with a coach who can say, okay, I thank you for telling me more of what's going on. Now, let's get into the heart of what's really going on, right? How does it feel when this situation happens? What do you need? Again, kind of going back to tapping into your emotions, your needs, bringing it back in to them, right? Because it's so easy for us to project and just like it's all about you, it's all about you, it's all about you. It has nothing to do with me. But the truth of the matter is it's a relationship. It's about us, and so what's happening in the mirror is bring something up in you. Let's talk about you for a moment. And not from a place of judgment or blame or any of that, but from curiosity. What's happening within you right now in this particular situation? And helping the members of that team get clear on that before even bringing them to the space of like, okay, how do we go back and work together? Right. And I think that that's a really important piece of the process, for allowing the person to sort of hear the story that they're telling, right? And to feel into what feels true and to feel into what do I need? And then how would I like this to be different? And get them out of that, oh, it's all them, it's all them, it's all them kind of space. Right? Because that blocks our accountability, that blocks our responsibility, that blocks our connection.
So, playing devil's advocate and staying in that vein, when you have that individual who is, I'm right, they're wrong, right? We have them. We know we do,
Mhm.
and that's the stance that they're taking.
Yeah,
How do you break that down? What? Because essentially, what we have to figure out is how to actually get them to see it in a mirror for themselves. Because
sure.
talking at them really doesn't do any good. Because that just
Right.
makes them more and more talk to the hand. Because I'm right.
Yeah.
So we've got to get them to that place of seeing it for themselves. Uh,
Mhm.
what are some of the techniques, or how do you go about managing those situations like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is where transformation and coaching really come into play. Um, I was trained by my coach in facilitating transformation, and she calls it the anatomy of transformation. And so when somebody's holding on, right, they're in the phase where they need to release. They need to release, right? And wanting to be right is a very strong desire. We have a very strong attachment to the need to be right. And so, with someone who's just like, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, they're in a stage of transformation where release could be actually liberating for them, that releasing that need to be right. In other words, releasing the illusion that they need to be in control and to help them see that. And so that might come about by asking them, what's the benefit of that for you, this need to be right? What's the cost of that for you? But asking the benefit of it, not necessarily from, not only from like, what do you get out of this, but how is it actually protecting you from something? And usually what I find is with that awareness, there's this deeper understanding of, oh, I actually now can see how this is limiting my performance, my success, my opportunities. And it can be very disarming. But some people are stubborn, and the ego likes to be right, right? And so that might happen over multiple iterations. But how is that working for you? Right? Like simply asking the question, how is that working for you? What's the cost of that? And getting them really present to the cost, the benefit, how it keeps them maybe safe or small. Um, and then moving them into a decision, like, what do you want to do with this? Do you want to keep holding on? Do you want to, do you have to cling to this need to be right? Do you want to repurpose that? Or are you ready to let it go?
It requires a lot of energy and effort, and I think
Yes,
that that's something people don't realize how much energy and effort they're putting into that,
it
and just
does. It's
simply
exhausting.
it is, yeah, and redirecting that in a more positive way. The benefits are astronomical. But again, as you said, letting it go is one piece of it. So I want to stay in the same direction, maybe just switch lanes over one lane. And this goes to another thing that I know culturally is out there, and we hear a lot of talk about it, and that's toxicity and how different it could be people, it could be entities, it could be cultures have this toxic feel to them. Um, when you come across those types of environments or individuals or whatever it might be, how are you addressing the toxicity piece of it? And to try to get people more in alignment so that they understand and get away from what I call win lose. I
Mm,
only win when somebody else loses type mindsets. And
yeah. From a business perspective, I've been fairly fortunate to not come up against this very often. But I can speak to it from a personal perspective for sure. And I'm just kind of feeling into, when I first entered the workforce, I have a journalism degree, and so I went into the news industry. I worked for a newspaper. Um, I worked first for a weekly newspaper, and that environment was pretty okay. And then I went to a daily newspaper in the Boston media market, and so it's a little more high stakes, a little bit more competitive. And I didn't quite understand. These were the term toxic work environment wasn't really a thing. This is in the 90s. But I felt that, and like to the point where I was having panic attacks going into work, you know and um, ultimately I decided, like, this isn't for me, and I just stepped out of it. And sometimes that's the answer, but when I look back, when I look back on it, I probably would have made the same decision. But at the time going through it, I really internalized that and personalized that, and felt like I was a failure. And it was probably the best decision that I made. Hindsight's 2020, right? And sometimes that's the answer. A lot of times that's the answer, is you just step out. You step out. And sometimes that's not an option, right? Um, so we have to be really true to ourselves in moments like that. Some people might naturally be inclined to maybe call that out and call in, some healing around that. Some people might just want to run away. And I guess why I'm bringing up these different examples is because I want to normalize that doing what's best for you is something that you can trust, right? Not everybody, not every culture, not every person is going to want to change or heal or improve. And when that's clear to you, and when you're clear that that's not aligned with what you want for yourself and in your sphere, you can take empowered steps and make empowered decisions from that place. As far as like people who are wanting to, like, or maybe they're in a toxic environment, or they're wanting change within that environment, that's going to take some awareness, some probably some healing, right? Because toxicity comes from a place of pain and wounding, and not necessarily having the tools to heal that, right? And so leaders who are committed to change, and commitment is the key term here, right? A lot of times we say we want to change, but we need to be committed to doing the work for that change. And that's an important piece of how committed are you? Are you just saying this because you know that that's the appropriate thing to say?
that old saying of action speaks louder than words, right? It's
Right.
really that simple.
Yeah.
You mentioned something in that really rang with me, and that's, you talking about trust, and you brought up the word trust. From a transformational, transforming yourself standpoint, how important is trust? And to drill that down one more level, how important is self trust in that?
Yeah. Oh, I think we need another show for that. That one's deep,
Absolutely,
right?
right.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. We talk about trusting others a lot, right? But when you trust yourself, that's actually when you unlock something, because it becomes less about outsourcing that trust. Like, oh, I don't trust that person. Okay, but that's something within you. I'm not saying that maybe there isn't evidence of hey, I shouldn't trust this person. But when you're in line and attuned to your self trust and you trust yourself, that's instead of kind of looking outside yourself for people to be trustworthy, that's a different place to be. And so I would say self-trust is huge. Right? But a lot of us have learned not to trust ourselves. And so there may be some work that needs to happen in order to rebuild that trust with yourself.
And then that's obviously wrapped up in the, when things don't go right or you have a failure and different things, you start to overthink,
Mhm.
self bash a little bit, just from the standpoint of, well, I made a poor choice. Now I don't trust myself when I'm in that similar situation again, have to make another choice.
Mhm.
But the realization there is that when you are taking a risk, that is what it's called. It's a risk, and
Right.
it's not always going to go as you thought it might, and starting to just get comfortable with that, and spending less time here just bouncing it around and going back and forth, and actually taking, as we just said a little bit ago, that next action step to start to try to move you forward.
Right.
Again, didn't say it was easy.
It's data, it's information too,
Right.
right? And we don't have to necessarily jump to the conclusion that we no longer can trust ourselves. We can reframe that, right? Well, I took a risk here, didn't work out the way I thought it would or the way that I wanted it to work out. What did I learn? What did I learn from this? And how do I want to carry that learning forward? And so that moves us more into a space of curiosity versus sort of judging ourselves or even judging others, right? Because sometimes it's other people are taking risks and we're like, oh, that was dumb. It's a very human thing to do, right? But if you have a process for, and a lot of businesses do, they have debriefs. They distill the learnings from their initiatives, and I feel like that's a process that can really help take the, not that emotions aren't important, but help kind of take the any sort of charge around it out of it and say, let's alchemize this. Let's figure out what the learnings are here. And then try again, try again from a different angle or just try something different altogether.
Oh, sorry, real quick. We'll get right back to the video, but I have a request from you. If you're getting value from this video, please click the subscribe button and also click like, and maybe even share this with some of your friends. Also, join our community by making a comment, sharing your thoughts, your experiences that are helping you to live, love, and lead your best possible life. That's it. Thanks for subscribing, and let's get back to the video. Self trust it's could be a superpower, I guess is a better way to put it. When you can really get to that place of truly trusting yourself, having that resilience to bounce back when it does not go as you expected or as you thought it might, it's huge. It's such a strength that you can have for yourself, and it opens doors. It builds bridges. It allows you to be able to communicate in so many different ways, so many different levels. That's pretty amazing stuff. So it's a good place to get to. And then, as we were saying a little while ago, how important that is, or relevant to transformation itself.
Yeah.
It's so tied together in moving yourself forward with that. The other thing I want to bring into this is we often also hear people talking about mindset and how mindset now, and it's interesting. I was just watching a different podcast the other day, and this is exactly what they were saying. We used to call it personal development, and now that's kind of old school. It's now mindset work, right? So
Mhm.
mindset has kind of become that new framework for it. Um, and what you do is discussions about mindset, something that comes up often, and then how do you go about showing or talking about how relevant mindset is, but not only that, how that there are or can be different mindsets at play within one individual, because I think that's another thing that people are surprised by. They think is like, well, I'm this way. It's like, well, no, you might be a little of this and a little of that and a little of this as well. How does that come up in your world?
Sure. I mean, it's a piece of my work, and I have an interesting relationship with this word mindset, right? Because we're a whole person, and we have a whole system. We have our mind, we have that mental capacity, right? We have our emotions, we have our energy, we have our physicality. And so I always like to think about it on those levels. We have our spirituality, right? A lot of time, it's not about religion. Like we might have a spirituality, a belief or in a higher power, for example, just to make it really general. And so I think all of those things, I feel like mindset really focuses on the mental. And I like to connect my work holistically. I like to, it's not just about changing your mind, it's changing how you be, what your energy, it's shifting your energy. In other words, the way that you're showing up to the world. So for me, it's deeper than just your mindset, because we can have awareness, like, geez, I have a lot of self-talk, but then we continue with the self-talk, for example, like a lot of negative self-talk, but we continue with it. So we might have a lot of awareness. We have that mental awareness, but then what do we do with it? And for the work that I do, that's about shifting your way of being. That's about shifting your energy, so that you're embodying something different. So you're no longer having that negative self-talk, for example. I mean, we all have that from time to time, right? But um, I feel like mindset is the beginning, right? Because our thoughts definitely have impact on our emotions and our actions and our behaviors. But we can always revert back to that. But when we shift the way that we're being, when we shift our energy, we might go back to that, but maybe not so much anymore. We sort of become, I don't want to say different, we just become more aligned with the truth of who we are.
I am 100% in agreement. That's kind of why I brought that up. Is we're multifaceted, and in all of those different areas, as you said, the mental, the spiritual, the physical, etc. That makes up the complete person, and all of those areas need to be addressed and focused on and cared for, to have that wholeness and to get an alignment. I always look at it like the four wheels on a car. If you've got two really bad wheels, the car is going to have a really bumpy, bad ride. Right, it's not going
Right.
to perform well. So making sure that you do try to have uh, work done, focused energy, effort on the different parts to level it out, so that you have some balance and some synergy. I think is a critical piece of it. So as you said, mindset is a piece of it. It is not all of it, and I absolutely agree with that. Last thing I want to come to, and you actually brought it up, and what you were just saying is being. How are you being, or your beingness, which is a word that coaches like you and I use a lot, but the average person might not be able to understand. Well, what do you mean? How am I being? Can you give your definition and how you go about explaining your beingness, which is related to how you show up, but kind of connect the dots a little bit for them?
Sure. So a lot of us are on autopilot. And even coaches like you and me who are doing personal development, who are doing our own transformation and leading transformative containers, like we do this is across the board, right? What might be a little bit different is that we have some tools, and we have a desire to work with that or to work on it. But part of being human is this whole idea of how we're showing up, from survival patterns, from coping mechanisms, from what I call default energy, right? Just what's our default? And we can go through life in that place. And some people don't realize that they can change that, and they can show up in a more aligned place with who they want to show up as, right? And so the way that this comes up in the work that I do is when we have this contrast of discomfort and desire, and that discomfort, or actually the desire, is greater than that discomfort, right? And so that's how we start to get to commitment around changes that we want to make. But we have to get some awareness around the fact that the reason why we're not getting the results that we want is how we're showing up. And we're actually showing up in a way that is getting us the results we're getting, right? And so we need to make some changes around that in order to get the results that we want. That's essentially how I think about it, and what that means to me when we're talking about shifting energy and shifting the way that we're being, right? Are we going to be on autopilot? Are we going to be in our survival patterns? And again, with no judgment, we all do this. Or are we going to come from a conscious, aware, and empowered place because we're committed to getting a new result, or we're committed to new possibilities?
Just like you said, us as coaches, we are just as susceptible to any of those patterns as well. It's not like there's this magic fairy dust that, and then you're changed forever. The challenges and the awareness that it takes to address those challenges go on. It really comes down to, as you said, when you identify or sense that that's what's going on, you can choose a different way of processing it, a different way of reacting to it. And
Right.
that's really what it is that really matters, is that moment of, aha, I see it, I understand it. Now let me address it in this way versus that way. And that's where the difference really comes in, is being able to do that. Amazing stuff. So I've reached this point in the podcast where I like to call final thoughts. So if there is a final thought that you would like to share with the audience, something for them to take away and kind of go, that's an interesting thought. Let me mull that over and see how I can apply that in my daily life. What would you like to share?
Yeah. Well, okay. It might seem a little disconnected, but I want to bring this forward again. Just,
Yeah,
I'm not sure when this comes out, but given the week that we've had, I want to circle back to this idea of truth and love traveling together. And I think that that's something that our country, our humanity in general, is needing. This is something that businesses are needing. Leaders, whether it's our political leaders or corporate leaders, or leaders of self, of one. It's really important to come back to the truth, in the sense of not looking for the absolute truth, but what feels true, and how do I honor that truth from a loving space. And so that's really I'm getting a little emotional, because I feel that
go for it.
we need to come back and reorient ourselves to, yes, strength and compassion. I talk a lot about bold and gentle leadership. It's a both and, right? It's not about control over, it's about collaboration, it's about co creation. Those soft skills are just as valuable as the hard skills, right? And so I think that the world's a little wonky right now, and it's an invitation. I see it as an invitation for growth and for bringing these aspects together versus, you know, tearing them apart and making one right and making one wrong.
Absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that. And I echo exactly what you're saying so much. Again, the divisiveness and being siloed and the finger pointing, and there's just so much that we have the opportunity to pull ourselves in a completely different direction, new trajectory of, as you said, love and compassion, and togetherness, and all of those things can coexist, and we can move in a similar direction together. I think that's very important that we start to focus on that. So thank you for sharing that perspective. So if our audience wants to connect with you, tell them where they can reach you, where you can be found, and invite them to reach out.
Yeah, so you can find me at my website at gaylnowak.com. It's GAYLENOWAK.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can look for me there. It's Gayle Doherty Nowak. Yeah, not .com, but that my profile is Gayle Doherty Nowak. Over on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, but really I don't spend a whole lot of time there. So I would say my website and my LinkedIn are the best place to find me. And then if you want to reach out by email, Gayle at thestorystylist.com, all one word.
Awesome. Thanks. Gail, this has been amazing. As I said, thank you for sharing and giving your perspective to the Ascent audience. I really appreciate it. Everyone out there, as I always say, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.
Bye.